Welcome to a new series of Hometown Histories. In this series, we're going to explore the history of the 10 towns which were once part of Ocean Township.
Hello, my name is Peggy Dellinger. I'm a trustee and the exhibit director at the Ocean Township Historical Museum, which is housed here where we sit in the Eden Woolley House. Today I'm sitting in for Dallas Grove, the host of Hometown Histories. This episode is one in a series that we're doing on the townships that were once part of Ocean Township. Today Ocean Township is just 11.1 square miles, but in the day, in 1849, when it withdrew from Shrewsbury Township and incorporated, it took with it all of the territory from Seabright down to the Manasquan River, all along the seacoast, which explains our name, Ocean Township, and west into Tinton Falls and today's Neptune. Today, which is December 21st, 2018, I'm here with Bob Waitt, and we're going to talk about one of those townships, or actually it's a borough, one of those municipalities that succeeded from Ocean Township, Interlaken. Bob has a distinguished career as a historian. He is the president of the Ocean Grove Historical Society. He is Interlaken's historian, and he's been a resident there since 2003, although he has a personal story to tell us perhaps about a closer connection that goes a bit further back than that. So Bob, welcome.
Thank you.
Maybe we could start by just kind of putting Interlaken on the map for our viewers. Just describe the town, the borough, and where it's situated, so that when we start to launch into the history, they'll be oriented to what we're talking about.
Okay, Interlaken is between Asbury and actually Elmhurst, and we're just a small town of about less than a mile, and we have 395 homes in there, and it's strictly residential, and it's been that way since 1895. And we have a variety of people that live there and who have lived there over the past almost 120 years or 30 years at this point. So it's a very unique town and a great place to live.
Right. So tell me, how did it all get started?
It all started back in 1687 when Gavin Drummond bought 500 acres of property from the Indians, and at a cost of a rifle, a pot, 5 jackets, and 2 pounds of gunpowder. And it stayed pretty much that way for well over 200 years when the Wells came into town. And they had been staying over in Deal at the time, and they decided that they would take a little tour of the area. And at that point, the area was strictly a forest, with a lot of fruit trees and animals and different things like that. And they decided, because of the lakes coming around it, it reminded them of Switzerland, a place that they had visited recently, and they decided to purchase some property. So they bought, I think it was 300 acres of property off of the estate of Drummond, and they decided to have a farm. So they cleared off a lot of the area, and this was back in the 1880s. And they had cattle there, and they had produce and stuff along that line. And they decided that such a nice town should be made into someplace where people could live with higher income people with bigger homes, and that's what they did.
So they didn't take to farming?
Well, they did for about 10 years, and it was in 1895 is when they started doing all this. And it was interesting because I think that they overbuilt. The lots were bigger, the homes were bigger, and they thought because of the railroad station being right there at Interlaken at that time that they could, provide a better place for people to come and go in the summertime, and it kind of didn't work.
So they developed it themselves? Did they kind of lay it out as a planned community?
Yeah, they did. They laid it out as a planned community, and they had some people come in and they started to build. They hired, an engineer. They hired a superintendent. And if you're on, when you come in over the railroad tracks into Interlaken today, you'll see there's a big home right there facing you as you come into Interlaken, that was like the first home that they built.
That's the one on Grassmere and Bridlemere?
Bridlemere, right on the
Yeah,
corner.
the Victorian right on
Yes.
the corner?
Yeah,
Yes.
and that just changed hands within the last 2 years. And then the other ones were kind of around the circle heading up Bridlemere. And they had
East, on the east end of what we know
Yeah.
as Interlaken today, right?
So they had probably maybe a half a dozen homes built, and nobody was buying them. So they went belly up. And the bank took it back, and they decided that they were going to do more with this. And it lay kind of vacant for a few years there. And around 1905, they started to rebuild everything. Smaller lots, a little bit smaller homes, and seemed to work out pretty well at that point. And that's when the wall went up when you first come in through the gates there.
Gates, yeah.
I mean, there was plans for a big hotel where the current Borough Hall is, a huge, huge hotel, but never happened. And things were scaled down. They had gas, they had water, they had curbs, they had paved streets. I mean, something most towns didn't have back in 1905. And I think
Speaking of the paved streets, tell me about the names of the streets. It's kind of intriguing because there are all these mirrors, and then all of the streets running north-south, I think, have a story too. How did they come by those names?
there's been a couple of stories. One said that they were named after Switzerland, and the other one says that they're named after lakes in England.
All right.
And
The mirrors.
the mirrors. Yeah, and I think that the England story is probably more of what it was.
Right. I have a personal question. On one end, the east end of Grassmere, the sign says Grassmere with one S. And on the west end of Grassmere, it says Grassmere with two S's. How do you spell Grassmere?
One S.
One S, okay.
And if you talk to some of the older residents, it's a sin to put the two S's.
Right.
And I learned that real quick.
So are they going to fix the sign?
Well, I don't know. I've asked the same question, and I know they're putting up new street signs.
Okay, so you
it
got to
may-
get your voice in there.
It may change.
Right.
Matter of fact, I
My
had a
theory was they
conversation.
couldn't fit the second S on the east side. No, that's not true.
No, I've heard different stories. I mean,
Right.
there's always stories. I mean,
Right.
And I interview and talk to a lot of the older people in the town, and they've all got a story.
Right.
And all of them tell me, don't you dare put in two S's in there.
Right,
It only has one.
So just tell me, the Welds, that's W-E-L-D, not well, as
it
in
was,
the hole in the ground.
Yes, WELDS was Francis and Fanny.
And what was their profession when they decided to go into first farming and then real estate development?
They were just wealthy people that I know.
Yes.
I kind of think that he might have been a lawyer, but don't hold me to that, I'm not sure.
Right.
But they liked the area. And it is a unique area even to this day.
Right. So we didn't talk about the north-south streets, the Iona and Staffa, and what are they named for?
I have no idea.
Right?
And I've asked the same question and haven't gotten an answer out of it.
Okay. I had heard once that they were the Scottish Hebrides Islands in the Irish Sea.
That's been one story, but there's always a second or third story.
Right.
And, sometimes trying to find them out, and I always try and research them and find them.
That's what we say. People say,
Yes.
or people believe, right? Or local lore has it,
Yep.
right? Because we can't pin it down.
No, I mean, that's basically the stories I get. It's amazing. I have a project going where I'm documenting all the homes in
Yes,
town
I
and the
know.
residents and so forth. And I interview a lot of the older ones, and I really enjoy talking to them. But they're kind of cute to talk to because at first they want to know what do you want to know. So
Right.
it takes about an hour before they loosen up. But they've all got stories, and I find them extremely interesting.
Tell me, you mentioned a railroad station. I think most people are surprised to know because we have 2 stations in Asbury, or we did in the day,
Right.
and one in Allenhurst, and there was one in Interlaken. So give us the time period for that, and what motivated them to build a station, and why isn't it there today?
The station was, as you come around Crawford Circle, it would have been just
What circle?
the circle when you come out of
What did you
Interlaken.
call it?
Crawford's.
I never heard that.
Yeah, that's one of the names that they've called it, so it's kind of stuck.
Is that recent, or is that forever? I never heard
going
that.
back for years and years.
Who's Crawford?
I have no idea. Nobody, must have been somebody they liked and they just named it. But it would have been right there. There was also a gas station there. And the gas station and the train station left about the same time.
So
The
if I'm heading west, going through the gates, this railroad station would be on the south, on my left,
We've been on the south before you go
On the
over
west side
before you
of
go
the
over the
road,
bridge to Asbury.
before we go over the bridge.
Right.
Okay.
And what happened was Ocean Grove had some rules about trains stopping there, and that's why they only stopped in Asbury and Ocean Grove.
Right. There's Sunday rules.
Yeah, not Ocean Grove, but Interlaken. They stopped at Interlaken. So as a result of that, eventually that changed a bit. So that station went away and was a second one put in Asbury Park.
Right.
So it
Right.
moved.
So so it was what, like 1895 to 1912ish kind of.
The train station, somewhere's in that time period.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's once again more stories. Yeah.
Right. Right.
But it was roughly in that time period.
It's useful for us to remember that in the time period we're talking about, there's no air conditioning,
Right.
right? And which is a significant factor when you live at the shore, because those who could afford it would pack their trunks, right? Get on that train and be able to come down. Were some of those homes in Interlaken summer homes originally, or were they always intended to be year-round?
No, they were summer homes. It was an artist colony.
Oh,
So-
tell us
so-
about that.
Well, you had some very famous artists in there. They sculptors and painters. Some did illustrations for Field and Stream magazine, and for different magazines like that. And a lot of the homes had little cottages behind where the artists would come and stay in the summertime and do their paintings and things like that. And there's still a few of them left.
Do you remember the names of any of them?
Yeah.
What would have, was that just coincidence? Like one artist moved in and then he invited his friends to
He
come
brought his
down?
friends in.
Right, so it was like seeding it with one,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then spreading the word that this was an ideal place.
Yeah, well, Croner and Cleary were two of the more prominent ones.
Okay.
And Frank Stick, who was the first mayor after we broke away from
Stick, Stick.
STICK, yeah. So, I mean, he was a very ambitious guy, too. If it wasn't for the Stick family, and they lived over on Windermere, and if he owned the property where the Wright Brothers Memorial is now at Kitty Hawk. And at the time, Congress couldn't decide.
In North Carolina.
In North Carolina. And Congress couldn't decide whether to buy that property. One side said yes, the other side said no. Then that side said yes, the other side said no. So after all this going on he was, I want to say it was around 1927, he donated the property to the federal government. And they needed more property. So he came back here and he started a fundraiser, him and Croner, and they decided that they would get enough money and buy the adjacent properties so that they could put that museum there. And they raised enough money to do that.
Wow.
So if it wasn't for Interlaken, there might have not have been a Wright Brothers Memorial.
Yeah, nice. And Croner's another artist?
Yeah, they all did work for Field and Stream and things like that.
Illustrators.
They were really illustrators and painters too at the same time.
Right. Are any of their works in Borough Hall, or is there any way that we could go in and other than Google, see what they did?
There is. There's one in there. It hangs on the wall when you first come in on the right-hand side, I think it is. And it's worth going in and taking a look.
Sure. Which one is it? Which artist?
I believe it's Corners.
Croner's.
Yeah.
Is he the one that did the Western scenes?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he had a studio right on Grassmere, which is still there, but it's it's no longer a studio. Someone uses it. It's not a residence.
Did you ever contemplate marking some of these homes for the famous that lived in them?
You're talking about for like a walking tour?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, but at this point, because of my involvement with the Ocean Grove and the other ones, it's been on the back burner a bit.
Right.
Yeah, what I try and do is when a house is sold, I immediately get a hold of the new resident and tell them who I am. And I like to meet with them. And I like to tour the house to see what it looks like today.
This is part of your project, right?
Yes.
So describe that project to us.
When I became a historian about 8 or 9 years ago, I was still working, and this was something that I don't know how I got the job, but I got it. And I had said, when I retired, I'd spend more time doing this. Well, within the first 2 weeks, I got calls from new residents wanting to know the history of their homes. And I said, unfortunately, I don't have any information. I just took this over. And I figured, well, I still have time to do something. Well, within the first 2 or 3 months, I probably had a half a dozen people contact me. So I said, well, I guess I have to do something. So what I did was I went to the Borough Hall and I got them to give me a list of all the addresses in town. So of course a lot more sequential
Right.
because of property size and so forth. And I sat down and started to, I joined Ancestry and a bunch of other ones and started looking people up at these homes. If you gave me a name of somebody that lived there.
So the list that you were given had the names of the current residents
Yes.
in them. Okay, so that was your starting point, was the present.
Yes, and work back.
And so your goal was to do a history of every address in Ocean Grove. What is it, 300 and how many homes?
395 homes.
Right.
It was my goal to get the history of every person that lived in the house since it was built.
Rather ambitious.
It was pretty ambitious. But
And how you doing on it? You started it 8 years ago?
Yeah, and I started out with about 8 pages, and I'm well over 100 now.
Wow.
And of course, I don't think I'll ever get everybody. You're going to miss somebody, but that's where interviewing people, the older residents, helps, because they'll say, I give them a copy, and they'll look at it and they'll say, oh, you missed Charlie Smith,
Right.
and you need to put him in there. So I would say, well, what year was Charlie living there? And they would say, well, he was there in 1925. And I would say, well, that tells me when the house was built too.
Right,
you know.
right, sure.
So I have some years on the file that talks about when the house was built, but it's not necessarily, might not be correct.
Sure.
But it's a reference point for me.
Sure.
But it gets really interesting. And like I said, finding the people that live there is pretty interesting. You know, we've had Supreme Court justices there.
Really?
We've had somebody who was an acting governor for a time. We have, you know, the Wright brothers stayed there during the air show in 1910. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. We've had somebody who won Emmys, and she was an illustrator for NBC. And she did some of the famous cases where, murder cases, where you couldn't take a camera.
Oh, Libby Dengrove.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she did the Son of Sam case and the
Right.
murder of the
Sure.
Med. So there's a whole bunch of things like that.
You can understand why the rich and famous would choose Interlaken.
Yep.
I mean, the design of it is lovely. The streets are particularly wide.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe there are any utilities on the street.
No.
Parking is not allowed on the street.
No.
Many of them, homes have little alleyways behind them, so all of that infrastructure stuff is invisible to the person passing by. They have the infamous 25-mile-an-hour, which you better pay attention to, right? Speed limit. And tree lined. The architecture is lovely, surrounded by lake. I mean, what more could you ask for? You understand why even today it's a very desirable place to live.
It is, and there's actually no homes for sale.
Really, at the moment.
At the moment, and I was talking with one of the realtors because I get involved with them too to find out who's moving in.
Sure.
And they had said that if the house goes on the market today, it's gone tomorrow. So
You have a very favorable tax rate too. That
the
helps.
tax rate is really favorable.
Yeah.
Compared to what's in the other towns.
Right.
But we have a good school system.
Today, your children go to Shore Regional
Yes.
and to the West Longwood Branch Elementary School and Middle School, right? That's a recent development, I believe, right? Yeah. Listen, you mentioned the air show, right? And as the director of the exhibits at the Ocean Township Museum here in the Woolly House, I am familiar with the air show because we did an exhibit in 2010, the centennial of the 1910 air show, that is referred to as either the Asbury Park Air Show or, as those of us who know, the Interlaken Air Show. So maybe you could describe to us what that was and how significant that was if we could put ourselves back 118 years to a time when it was only 7 years after the Wright brothers had flown at Kitty Hawk, which makes your story about Frank Stick all the more memorable, right?
Right.
Because when he's donating his land at Kitty Hawk, there's a connection to Interlaken that makes it even more meaningful.
Oh, it does, yeah.
So tell us about the air show.
Well, the air show was actually started by Asbury Park.
Right.
The Asbury Park Auto and Motor Club. But they had no place to hold it. So at the time, Interlaken was considered a suburb of Asbury Park. and we had a lot of land open. The west side, 40 acres all the way from Corley's Avenue over to Windermere. I think it was called Beach River Drive at the time, Corley's Avenue. And that was all vacant. And that went all the way down to where Rona is today.
So that includes the Interlaken Park, what is today the Interlaken Park. Right?
Yeah, where the Interlaken Park is, that was where the airfield started. They had their field hospital, they had their parking lot there. Rona was a little different way of getting around there because now it bends around the opposite way. But they had 40 acres, so it was ideal for an air show. And it was very significant because it brought 100,000 people there over the 10 days, actually 13 because they had some bad weather.
They also do, the Waitt brothers, who were very devout, would not do anything on Sunday, if I remember correctly.
Absolutely.
So you had to skip Sunday.
So they skipped Sunday. And they had 5 pilots that they brought there. And there was so many firsts that happened at that air show. You know, they had the first night flight. They had the first time somebody in the stands was hit by a piece of material when a plane crashed. It was the first time a car was hit. It was
by an airplane.
By an airplane.
The first airplane to car collision. Maybe the last, who knows?
It might have been the last. But the interesting thing was the guys whose car it was, he didn't want anything because he knew he was the first one to get hit by an airplane. And it took his radiator and his headlight off. And they said, you know, they'd give him some remuneration for his damage to his car. Didn't want it. He was okay with it.
Right.
I mean, today I would probably have been a big suit.
If I remember correctly, there was a fatality, though, right?
There was. Johnny Mac had 2 balloons. And
hot air balloons.
Hot air balloons. And they were going to, at 4,000 feet, they were going to jump out. Two guys and parachute down. Well, the one guy jumped and his parachute opened, and the second one, it didn't open. And he wound up crashing into an apple tree. And
on the airfield?
On the air, well, yes, right on the...
In view of the grandstand?
Oh, yeah. Oh, people were running, screaming, and jumping up and down. Anyway, he, being good entrepreneurs as they were, where he hit the ground, it was an indentation. And they fenced that off, and you could go see that for a nickel. So they were doing different things. So, but the air show was really good. I mean, they had the first airmail flight, unofficial.
Right.
They flew over to Deal Country Club with a letter and delivered it. The first night flight where they flew over Asbury Park, over the boardwalk and along the ocean. And they were crazy pilots, let's put it that way. I mean, one of them, he couldn't see. And B never told the Wright brothers. So he was flying airplanes up here and he couldn't see. And one of them was left-handed, and the planes were made for right-handed. But there was one plane was left-handed, and Brookins flew that the first day and crashed it. So now the left-handed...
Brookins was not the left-handed pilot.
No.
He was, I think he was the first pilot the Wright brothers trained.
He was. So he, the left-handed pilot now has to use a right-handed airplane. But nobody knew he couldn't see. So it got better as they went along.
If I remember, 2 of the 5 pilots that the Wright brothers brought to Interlaken were dead before the end of 1910, before the end of the year.
Johnstone and Huxley.
Right,
they were both killed. One shortly after, and the other by the end of the year. They were crazy. You know, they would
Definitely. Daredevils, right?
Yeah, they tried to outdo the other one.
Exactly, kind of the extreme sports of the day, right?
Yes.
And you know, if I remember as well, that in 1910 there were a series of air shows all around the world, really, a lot in France. One in Atlantic City that predated the Interlaken one, but the same year. And the goal was really a business objective, because most people on the face of the earth had never actually seen an airplane. Only 7 years since the first flight.
Right.
And they were really interested in building up a business where people would want to fly. And so they put on a show.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it was quite a show, right? 100,000 people. And this was when the train station was there, so people could come down from the city.
Well, they had a parking lot for 3,000 cars that they say was filled every day.
Yeah.
The grandstands would have held 10,000 people, and that was filled every day.
Right.
So, I mean, when you think about the number of people, And because 100,000 people showed up in Interlaken, that started a boom in property because
Sure.
everybody saw what a great place it was.
Right. I think I remember a real estate brochure that took
Yes.
advantage of the air show, right? That if you like it here today,
Yeah.
come back and live, right?
Well, one of the interesting things I found doing all that research was that I actually have a distant cousin that flew for the Wright brothers. And he was responsible for doing the memorial down in Washington at the National Space and Museum with the Wright brothers plane. So, I mean, these are the things you find as you start digging.
Right. And in addition to your project in documenting every one of the 395 residences in Interlaken, you took on another project which is also dear to my heart because I had never known about the Interlaken Air Show. When I did the research for the exhibit here at the Woolly House, I was fascinated by it and frustrated that nobody knew all of this interesting story. And I think that's how we met,
Yes.
right,
Yep.
in the aftermath of that exhibit. And you took it on yourself to make sure that people wouldn't forget. Tell us what you did.
Well, I had approached the mayor and the council, and I said that I wanted to put up a monument. And of course, the first question is, what's the cost on it?
Right.
And I said, well, I don't know, but I just want to get the feeling from the mayor and the council. And it was a good feeling, but once again, how much is it going to cost?
Right.
So we had looked at several different things. One would be like a bronze plaque. The other might be an obelisk with something written on it, different things like that.
I'm picturing a Wright brothers plane. No, that never could.
That might be really expensive.
Right.
So we went back and forth for about 3 years before we finally got what we want to do. And currently, this past August, we put up a bronze plaque over in the park. Is where everything first started
Right.
there. And that would have been where the parking lot for the cars would have been, is where it currently is, but that was all part of where they were. And it's up, and we had a little ceremony this past August, and a lot of people showed up. I was really surprised. I had put pictures up and had a tent, and we had people sign up, and I got a chance to meet some people and
Sure.
things like that too. So it worked out very well.
Congratulations. I really admire your commitment in getting it done. And for those people and every child who plays there now,
Yep.
you're passing on that fascinating history that was largely forgotten.
It was forgotten because it was interesting, because when I first heard about it was when I took over. Somebody said it was an air show, and I said, well, let me ask some of the older residents. And most of them would be gone at that point, but they were children, and they said that their parents talked about it, but they knew nothing more than the fact that there was an air show with the Wright brothers there.
Right.
And so that led some credence to the fact that I should go investigate more.
Speaking of famous people who came to the air show, do I remember correctly that Thomas Edison was there? Or when he was scheduled to come and...
He was scheduled to come, but it rained,
Oh.
so he didn't show up. So, but the governor showed up, and some other notables.
Sure.
But yeah, he didn't make it that day. It was on a Wednesday, and they had a bad windstorm and rain. And,
It rained on his parade.
Yeah, rain on his parade, and I don't know whether I want to be in one of those planes and up in the air when it was
No.
raining like
No,
that.
they didn't fly when it... Did they? They didn't fly at all when it was inclement.
A couple of them tried, and then the wind got too much, and they couldn't do it.
Right.
Because don't forget, the first planes they had in the air show had skids on them.
Right, the Wright brothers.
Yeah.
Glenn Curtis was smart enough to put wheels under his.
Well, the Wright brothers, when the first plane crashed, they had other planes from their factory sent down by rail to Bradley Beach.
Which must have been fun to watch get unloaded, right?
Well, what they did was they had to bring them back to Interlaken and assemble it, but they had wheels now, and that was the reason why the car got hit.
Because it kept going.
Well, it kept going.
They put wheels but no brakes.
No brakes on. Yeah, he was very concerned. The pilot was concerned that, how do you stop this thing?
Right.
Well, you don't stop it.
You hit a car.
Yeah, you hit a car, and that was how the first accident happened.
Right. So, take us to 1922. So 1910 is the air show. 12 years later, Interlaken decides they've had enough. What happened?
The only thing that I have found was that they wanted to have their own form of government and everything else. So in 1922, they broke away. And it was mainly, Stick was involved, very involved. So that's why he
Stick
became
the artist, Frank.
Yeah, he became the first one. And Croner was too, and Cleary, and all the artists were the ones who really got involved.
Did you hear any rumors of their malcontent? Was there a reason, or was it? I think it was kind of New Jersey is notorious for its home rule and for its tiny municipalities. I guess they just got swept up in that wave.
I'm guessing, because I've heard no stories. Most of the people aren't around anymore. That they just wanted to break away and be by themselves,
Right.
and they did in 1922. And that's how we became a borough. We had a little borough hall, we'll call it, but it was actually the renting shack, I'll call it. That's where if you
The real estate office.
Yeah, if you wanted to buy rent or anything, you went to this
Right.
place, and that became the borough hall. And then eventually it was torn down, the current one was built too.
Right. So today, you stand as a less than a half-mile square municipality, and you're sticking to your guns, or you're thinking, there's no sentiment for consolidation?
No, I mean, different towns, Lock Harbor has asked to join us and so forth, and that didn't happen yet either. And so I think that you're going to, see more of that. People want us to join them and become part of them again. But there's been no push to break away.
And you did consolidate. You had your own police force right up
We
till when? About 7
It
years.
was, I want to say about 10 years ago.
10 years ago, right? And now you're served by Ocean Township, correct?
Deal.
Oh, Deal.
Deal.
Sorry.
Yeah, I forget the exact year, but it's about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Bob Todd was the last police chief that we had. No, I'm sorry, there was a woman after him that came after Bob. And she was there maybe a year or so, and then we went to Deal.
Right.
So, and we've had we've had a good local police force, and Deal has been very good too. They really patrol.
I do see their cars
Oh, they're all
patrolling that 25-mile-an-hour speed limit
Yeah.
very aggressively.
I get to wave at them all the time as they go
Yeah.
past the house.
Right.
So,
Well, thank you, Bob. Interlaken is just a gem. It truly is a gem, and I understand why there are no houses for sale. It's really a very desirable place to live, and we're sorry it's not part of Ocean Township anymore, but we appreciate you sharing your stories with us today. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. We appreciate it.